Hey everyone, I wanted to go over the new and exciting news we got for Monster Hunter Rise on the Nintendo Switch. Late last week, a massive preview embargo was lifted where several outlets, not just in Japan but also in the West, were able to go over some prepackaged films sent to them by Capcom, essentially showing about 10 minutes of the village exploration and what you need to do to prepare for the hunt, and then two actual separate hunts, one versus a Kezu and another one versus a Bishaten. If you saw these videos from several outlets and a few YouTubers, it was all the same one provided by Capcom and an ad actually captured by themselves. But alongside these previews, several developer interviews also hit, where we learned quite a bit of new information, and today I wanted to cover just some of the important parts. Producer Ryoso Tsujimoto explains that each Monster Hunter game has a core idea before the development begins, and with Rise it was clear that the new concept would be portability. The simple nature of arcing back to pick up and play whenever you want is something that they wanted to heavily focus on after their cycle with Monster Hunter World. With that said, every title has its own concept and driving features, so expressing that with Rise was crucial. Expounding on that, director Ichinose says that the Switch is quite a bit more ways more powerful than the 3DS and the PSP, and the sacrifice from a visual and control standpoint was much lower than actually expected. That's why the team set out to make a Switch game from the outset. This allowed them to focus on new additions, and none were actually cut as a result. Everything that the team actually wanted to accomplish with this game, they managed to do it. One of the biggest surprises, if you hadn't been following the leaks, is that in one of the interviews, Tsujimoto states that a PC release is scheduled for early 2022 release, but it's still very much in early development. If you've been watching my channel, you know that in the leaks I spoke about the PC release a year post the Switch launch, so it seems like those plans are still in motion. While obviously not addressed in one of the interviews, you have to wonder what actually happened and why they decided to confirm the PC release now. If you recall, in their original leaks, while shaky on the specifics, they were adamant that Nintendo was paying for 6 to 9 months of silence from Capcom to not divulge the existence of a PC version. Not that they wanted the game to be specific for the Switch, but to simply not make it public till the game had been out on the Switch for a little bit of time. But here we are, with a month before launch, and the producers and the directors are talking about the PC version openly. Perhaps due to the leaks the alleged money exchange fell through or what, I'm not necessarily sure. I hope we find out in the future. The interview then shifts to talking about the village and how the rampages are the biggest threat, where hordes of monsters attack the town in a faster pace, kinda like the Zora or Lao Shan fights from games past. On top of hunters fighting these monsters, villagers will also be providing a helping hand whenever possible. At the top of the rampage, you'll be finding an apex monster to fight, and while they borrow the name from the virus-affected monsters from Monster Hunter 4, director Ichinose states that they are not related. Apex is their form of signifying that this is a stronger creature that you're used to fighting, and the last one on each one of the rampages. There's no mysticism or magical powers, just a difficult, much more stronger encounter than you usually expected. He extrapolates that neither side is necessarily bad in this game. The monsters are simply living by nature, and humans are trying to survive. Another interesting tidbit is that the hunter you are actually playing, while still customizable and created by you and named by you, is still contextually placed as a local of Canberra Village. You're not just some random mercenary hunter out for fame, but instead you wish to save your hometown. All the locals know you by name, and your character expresses that throughout the game. They all feel like a family growing up in Canberra Village and wanted to see it safe. Ryoso Tsujimoto explained that the team settled on the RE engine for the Switch release for flexibility. Of course, that also came with its own type of challenges, since it's a series with tons of lore and pedigree. Making sure that the online HUD experience with friends was intact while also offering a local multiplayer experience was something that helped make the decisions much easier. They developed the game with the portable mode in mind and built it out from there. To touch on that, the pedigree and the inclusion of amiibo support was a no-brainer as well. This wasn't a decision made by one person. In fact, the developers and the Cell teams alike were looking to make this happen. Amiibos will allow the team to give popular characters and monsters some action figures for the series, and they're happy to include them. Producer Tsujimoto was asked if Rise borrows anything from Monster Hunter World, since the focus was always on portable experience. He explains that since development began almost 4 years ago, it's partly overlapped with World to begin with, so initially nothing was really borrowed. With that said, there are tons of quality of life improvements that were brought over. He also touched upon developing the game during the pandemic and stated that things like meetings had become online Zoom calls after all, and they hardly ever meet in person anymore, which brings his own set of challenges. In one of the interviews, he was asked what would he recommend to new players to make the game a little bit easier to acclimate to. Producer Sugimoto made it clear that the wire bug is the biggest inclusion to the game when it comes to combat. Getting accustomed to it and playing around is always a nice start. It adds a new layer and set of elements not available to the series before. It feels good to move around in the environment using the wire bug, and testing it out as much as possible is highly encouraged. While the speed and movement and support of the Palamute is also important, the wire bug is definitely changing the way of the core combat mechanics. The team was quite satisfied to see the versatility and the weapon usage during the demo. The sword and shield, the switch axe, hammer, greatsword, longsword, and even the hunting horde were extremely popular. In fact, so much so that the team couldn't believe how many users were willing to test out the hunting horde in Monster Hunter Rise. Director Ichinose was asked about the reaction to the game and specifically the Palamutes after the game's original introduction. He states that the reaction was extremely popular worldwide, surprisingly enough, and that the news that you can create your own Palamute and customize it by shaping their ears, their tail, and even the color of their coat was probably the driving factor for such a positive response. Monster reactions was also positive, even with the original reveal of just Magnum-Alo, Agnasam, Tetranodon, and Grady Suchi. Tons of theories were being posted online about the origins of each one of these monsters, and the team was extremely happy to see that. However, it wasn't all as expected. Because the game's original Japanese and Asian flavor, the team was worried about the fan reactions, but were also surprised and happy to find out that they were extremely positive. Director Ichinose states that the team wanted to maintain the core of the Monster Hunter experience at all costs, and the 4-player multiplayer is no better example of it. Allowing you to bring one buddy along each one of the 4 hunters lets you focus on either a single task before a hunt or directly engaging with monsters, and you know you already have some help. He also acknowledges that the fans love the difficulty adjustments when online, and they knew to bring that feature along as well. Because exploration is another big component, they did not want to limit you if you wanted to gather and take the game slowly. That's why outside of main quest, you'll find exploration quests that just let you go out about your own pace without any hesitation of a constant running timer. He also explained that the team considered the characteristics of the Switch because hunting on the go was a big focus as stated previously. The team wanted to give players a higher tempo than ever before. That means faster hunts and quicker progression. Getting the necessary performance out of the Switch hardware requires some adjustments, but the team was happy to achieve them at all costs, and they're happy with the results. So that's about all for the important bits from something like half a dozen interviews that I saw posted online with the development team. Like I mentioned previously, on the PC release confirmation for the early next year does come as a bit of a surprise, after all the leaks we got so far. But it was something that was so widely reported that perhaps the development team figured that the damage had already been done, and something that they couldn't necessarily avoid. I always maintained the theory that if there was one thing that would prevent this game from not selling extremely well, would be performance. Since we saw that was not the case with the demo, then the only real thing holding the game back would be people waiting for a PC release. But I don't quite understand that mentality at all for myself. Most of the fun for Monster Hunter for me comes from enjoying the growth with everyone, as they all learn the new fights together. Not just joining a hammer room to grind for the best gear available or basically speedrun the main quest. That's just my personal way of playing. I also chose not to include segments from the Japanese interviews, since the translations are not very clear in some parts, so I'm actually hoping to reach out to someone who's more fluent in Japanese to clarify some of the statements. Not necessarily anything worrisome to say, but the last thing that I want to do is cover some mistranslation that could have been easily avoided. The last thing that I'll quickly mention is that I already have my plans set covering next week's Monster Hunter Rise Direct streams. While I didn't really go over my expectations on the original reveal video, I should do a video covering that later in the week. There's still quite a bit of things that we know are gonna be showed just based off the leaks and obviously the demo. But even then, there's still tons of new details about the game that we didn't know about that were never mentioned in the leaks. That's on top of the monster reveals. Hopefully, I can get to that soon. If you're new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya!